On today's episode, Marc-Andre Fleury gave it his all in net last night, stopping 46 of the 48 shots that he faced, but the Blackhawks still wind up losing 2-1 in overtime to the Boston Bruins. Then I'll also get into some of the latest updates surrounding the Blackhawks with the trade deadline approaching, and also some whispers of what the front office is hoping to net in return for a couple players that are currently listed on the trade block. To wrap things up, I'll also get into former second round pick Alex Vlasic inking his entry level contract with the Hawks on Tuesday morning. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Today is Wednesday, March 16th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And if you're listening to the audio version of today's episode and you like what you're hearing, then please go and show some support first by following the podcast. It literally take a quick click of the button. It'll help me out tremendously. Go and leave the show 5 stars if you like what you're hearing today as well. And you can also leave me a review too. Best of all, it's 100% for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts, whether that be through Apple Podcasts, Odyssey, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. It's all 100% for free. And if you go and follow the show right now, then you'll be able to get the latest episode as soon as it comes out each day. And if you're not already watching the video version of today's episode, then definitely be sure to go and check out Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, because from here on out, folks, each episode is going to have a video version attached to it as well. So if you haven't done so already, please go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Go and smash the like button. I would greatly appreciate it. And be sure to turn on those notifications so you can be notified when the episode is uploaded to YouTube each and every day. All right, good morning, everyone. And as always, thank you for tuning into another episode of Locked On Blackhawks and for making the show your first listen here to start off your day. Last night, the Chicago Blackhawks squared off with the Boston Bruins for the second time within a week. And my, oh my, what a dreadful performance that they put together last night. Despite managing to get this one to overtime, it was honestly one of the worst performances I've seen from them this season, and that's really saying something. But before I get into the good stuff on today's show, folks, I got to remind you all that the episode is sponsored by rockauto.com. Go to rockauto.com right now to save both time and money while shopping for auto and body parts from hundreds of different manufacturers. So last night, the Blackhawks fall 2-1 to the Bruins in overtime. And as I already mentioned, this was the second meeting within the last week between these two teams. And in the first meeting up in Boston last Thursday, the Hawks, aside from surrendering a couple of power play goals in the second period, they really did put together a pretty strong showing on the road against a playoff team in the top-heavy Eastern Conference, only to get their hearts broken in the final 17 seconds of regulation because, of course. So the Hawks really deserved better than what they got in that opening meeting last Thursday, but they certainly didn't deserve better in the game they played last night. The only reason that this was even close and wound up getting to overtime is solely due to the performance that Marc-Andre Fleury had in net. And it was pretty clear from the get-go. I mean, the Bruins came with a strong push right out of the gate, but Fleury, he was on top of his A game all night long. It was pretty evident that he was going to have a solid performance with the way that he got off to a roaring start. And honestly, thank the heavens that he was on top of his A game, because this really could have been a 5 or 6-0 shellacking in favor of the Bruins last night, especially with how dominant they were in those opening 40 minutes. It was pretty terrible. I believe the Hawks got outshot 14-4 in the first period and then went on to get outshot 21-7 in the second period as well. They were super sloppy, couldn't get the puck out of their own zone. I mean, the passing all night long was actually atrocious. I was literally screaming at my TV because these guys couldn't make a tape-to-tape pass. They couldn't get the puck out of their own zone. They were struggling to get anything going in transition. Even the top line of DeBrincat, Strome, and Kane really had nothing going on for the most part. Sure, they cycled the puck well in the offensive zone, but they really had a hard time generating any sustained pressure, getting entered into the offensive zone to set themselves up. Um, so it was a pretty poor, especially the first 40 minutes were really poor. But thanks to Fleury just being an absolute monster in net, this game somehow remained scoreless heading into the third period. Marc-Andre Fleury stopped all 35 shots that he faced in the opening 40 minutes. You heard me correctly, folks. The Blackhawks gave up 35 shots on goal in the opening 40 minutes of this game. I really have nothing good to say about the Blackhawks from those first two periods other than the effort that Marc-Andre Fleury gave in net. It was just clearly a matchup between teams that are just on completely different levels at this point and at completely different stages as a franchise right now. The Bruins would eventually, in the third period, go on to squeak one through Fleury after kind of a mad scramble in front of the net. Patrice Bergeron wound up knocking the puck out of midair to give Boston a 1-0 lead. And honestly, with how terrible the Blackhawks were playing, I figured that was going to be good enough to be the game winner for the Bruins. Surprisingly, the Hawks proved me, and I'm sure a lot of people wrong as well, by tying the game 1-1 to make things interesting there in the third. Brandon Hagel redirects a shot home for his 21st goal of the season and also his fourth in the last 4 games. So Hagel, baby, keeps on pushing towards that 30 goal mark. I know there's been rumors about Hagel potentially being traded, but with the way he's played recently, you got to think the only way the Hawks are going to move him is if someone else is really offering the bag, basically. He's been incredible, not only with the goal scoring, but his tenacity. He's a great defensive player. He hustles all over the place. He's literally the Energizer Bunny out there. So despite the Blackhawks offense pretty much being stymied all night long, nice surprise that Hagel was able to find the back of the net on a nice redirect. And Caleb Jones, by the way, was the one to pick up the primary assist on Hagel's goal. That now gives Little Jonesy points in 3 consecutive games, as well as 8 points in his last 9. So after being injured to open up the season and kind of getting off to a slow start once he did return to the lineup, it's good to see Caleb and that offense finally coming around. The defense still needs a little bit of work, but the offensive side of his game is starting to finally all come together. So despite getting throttled all night long, the Hawks did find a way to tie this game up 1-1 in the third period. The Bruins actually, it appeared that they took a 2-1 lead just a couple of minutes later, but thanks to a questionable goaltender interference call that even got reviewed, I think in most folks' opinion, this was not goaltender interference. I'm not really sure what goalie interference even is at this point, if that was goaltender interference, but the Blackhawks catch a huge break, and they actually wound up heading to the power play with a little bit under 5 minutes to go in regulation. It was like, oh my, are they going to steal this one? Despite getting absolutely dominated all night long. Unfortunately, though, they really couldn't get much going on the man advantage. Passing really was just so sloppy. Even on the man advantage, they were trying to force passes that just weren't making a lot of sense. Nothing was clean. Nothing was tape to tape. It was really frustrating that the Blackhawks kind of blew that opportunity late in the game to vault ahead when they had no business even being close in this one. So the game did wind up heading to overtime thanks to Marc-Andre Fleury again. But in OT, it didn't take very long for the Bruins to rattle off the game winner. A poor decision by Alex DeBrincat and Patrick Kane in coverage. They both wound up taking the same guy up high. That gives Boston 2-on-1, and then Taylor Hall finds Matt Grzelcyk for an open net. Literally nothing Fleury could do on that one. And the Hawks wind up falling 2-1 in the extra frame, despite Marc-Andre Fleury doing his best, tying a career high with 46 saves. But unlike the rest of his teammates, Fleury deserved a whole lot better than what he received last night, was more deserving of an overtime loss. The execution and the effort level in front of him just simply was not good enough. The team in front of him dropped the ball. And you heard the disappointment in their voices when talking to the media after the game. They know this isn't the first time that Marc-Andre Fleury has kept them around in a game they have no business being in. So disappointing that they weren't able to sneak out a win for Flower last night. No surprise, though, with the way that they played, that they come out on the losing end. 2-1 in overtime, even though Marc-Andre Fleury had arguably his best performance all season long. All right, there are some quick thoughts on the Blackhawks' frustrating and disappointing loss to the Boston Bruins last night. Coming up in just a moment, I will get into a report on what the Hawks front office is hoping to receive for a couple of players that are currently listed on the trade block. But first, I need to talk to you all about Bet Online. Football season may be over, but Bet Online still has way more odds and info for both pro and college hoops, which of course is now just about to begin March Madness. From game scores, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, Bet Online remains your number one spot for all sports betting here in 2022. And it's not just basketball. From the NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, do not wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2022 season. Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and Vegas casino games. Bet Online, where the game begins. All right, we're back here on Locked On Blackhawks. Moving on into segment 2 now today. I also wanted to be sure to kind of discuss a recent article that was written by Scott Powers of The Athletic, where he talked about what the Blackhawks front office is kind of hoping to receive for a couple players that are currently on the trade block. And just last week, actually, on the show, I went over what I kind of believe the Hawks will be or could be potentially receiving for players like Dylan Strome, Dominic Kubilik, Calvin DeHaan, Ryan Carpenter, etc. And I just kind of wanted to go over that once again here today, and to also kind of compare that to what Scott Powers is hearing from the front office regarding these players. First, Marc-Andre Fleury. One thing to note is that last night potentially could have been his final start at the UC, or even with the Chicago Blackhawks for that matter, because for the sake of the rebuild, the Blackhawks are undoubtedly going to try and move Marc-Andre Fleury if he gives them permission to do so. And for the sake of the rebuild, the Blackhawks, us Blackhawks fans gotta hope this winds up being true, that Marc-Andre Fleury is going to get moved before Monday, because it sure sounds like the team could be netting a first-round pick for him, especially after how well he played last night. Of course, there's so many factors that play into this here. Fleury has said he wants to go somewhere where a team is going to offer him a contract after this season. He still wants to play next year, but he doesn't want to, go from Vegas to Chicago to another city for half a year and then to another city the following season, which makes sense. He's a family guy. He said that's a huge priority for him since he's been here in Chicago. So that's a factor that plays into this. Fleury likely will only get traded to a place that's willing to give him a contract extension after this season. Also, he's got that 10-team no trade clause, and how many teams does he actually want to go to? I'm not so sure that there's all that many in consideration right now. And then also, whatever team Fleury is interested in and they're interested in him, Kyle Davidson and their GM still have to find a way to make a deal work. So it really is kind of a complicated matter. And honestly, because of that, I do believe that Fleury is more likely to remain in Chicago than not at this point. But if he is willing to get moved, which still up in the air, we still don't know for sure. And I really do believe the front office is going to do everything in their power in order to get it done, knowing how valuable those potential assets could be in return going forward. But for a player like Dylan Strome, who is still currently on the trade block, at least according to Scott Powers, apparently the Blackhawks are hoping to be getting a second-round pick in exchange for Strome at the deadline. And when I talked about Strome last week and what I thought the Blackhawks would be able to net in return for him, I said it would most likely be a third-round pick, in my opinion. And honestly, I'm probably sticking to that here because I just don't see anyone out there giving up a second round pick for Strome straight up. Even though he's been playing so well since actually getting an opportunity inside the Blackhawks top 6. I know it's been a real successful last couple of months for Stromer, but there still are plenty of concerns about his game, mostly his speed and his ability to play down the middle for a Stanley Cup contender. The pace of his game has really always been a concern. Also, the inconsistency throughout the years, I know that kind of goes hand in hand to Jeremy Colleton being reluctant to use him in a position where we know he can succeed in. But I think teams are also going to be wary about those consistency issues over the past couple of years. I just kind of feel like a second is a little bit far-fetched at this point. But of course, if the Hawks do wind up trading him, I'll be keeping my fingers crossed that they'll be able to maximize the most out of this deal and get a second in return. I feel like the only way that's going to happen, though, I don't feel like that's going to happen straight up for Dylan Strome, especially considering, he could only be a rental player. Who knows what his future is going to be as an RFA? Maybe the team who acquires him, if that happens, of course, maybe they want to keep him on long term. Maybe they don't. Maybe they don't know where their finances are going to be. So I feel like straight up a second round pick for Dylan Strome probably isn't going to happen, but it could if the Blackhawks are willing to sweeten the pot a little bit, or maybe take on a bad contract from that team in return as well. So we'll see what ends up happening there. I personally am still not on the Dylan Strome train, I should say. But if that's the decision that Davidson winds up making, they have to be willing to do whatever it takes to maximize this deal and get as many future assets as possible. And I believe the only way to get a second for Dylan Strome is if they're willing to sweeten the deal or take on another bad contract. And two other players who the Hawks are actually hoping to get second round picks for as well is both Dominic Kubilik and Calvin Haan. And honestly, this kind of feels laughable to me. I'm not going to lie. And I know first for Kubilik, he's a former 30 goal scorer. Only a couple years ago, he was a finalist for the Calder Trophy. But with the kind of year that he's having, and all of his numbers, not just the shooting percentage, let's be honest, all of his numbers are down right now. And even last night, the Blackhawks played him on the fourth line with Mackenzie Entwistle and Philip Kurashev. Not exactly sure that's the best route to go when you're trying to get the most for him as possible within the next week. So I really just don't seeing a second round pick being possible for Dominic Kubilik. There's also the fact that Kubi will need to be offered at least $4 million on his qualifying offer in the offseason. So probably just a rental for another team that's looking to add a little bit to their goal scoring department. I just don't see anyone giving up a second for Kubilik at this point. And I also don't see anyone giving up a second round pick for Calvin Haan either. I know he's a veteran defenseman with a ton of experience. He's a guy who's willing to sacrifice his body in any way possible for the greater good of the team. But he's still probably, in my opinion at least, a third pairing defenseman on a Stanley Cup contender. So with that being the case, a second round pick, man, I, I just don't see that happening for Calvin Haan. And honestly, I don't even know if a third round pick is possible for Calvin DeHaan. It does seem far more likely than a second. But even that kind of feels out of reach, in my opinion. I mean, Calvin has not been, let's let's be honest, he just really hasn't been all that good since coming to Chicago. There's a ton of injury woes. He's had multiple surgeries on his shoulder, and even with when he has been healthy, um, aside from being a warrior and willing to block literally any shot, um, he's struggled and has not been the shutdown defenseman that I think the Blackhawks were hoping for when they acquired him. This year, in particular, when he's been healthy for the majority of the season, I thought he's just been a little bit underwhelming and doesn't provide any offense at all. I know that's not his game, but to be giving up a second round pick for that type of player, I just don't see another NHL team doing that right now. So while Davidson, is wanting to get the most out of his players at the deadline, which I certainly understand, I'm just not so sure he's going to be getting his wishes unless the Blackhawks are able to sweeten the pot a little bit. If not, it's hard to imagine all three or potentially even any of those three that I just mentioned, Strome, Kubilik, or Calvin DeHaan, netting a second round pick in return before Monday's trade deadline. All right, there are some thoughts on what the Blackhawks are hoping to get in exchange for a couple players currently listed on the trade block. Coming up in just a moment, I will get into 20-year-old defenseman Alex Vlasic signing his entry-level contract with the team on Tuesday morning. But first, I need to talk to you all about RockAuto.com. Rock Auto is a family business that's been serving auto parts customers online and do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Go to rockauto.com right now to save both time and money while shopping for auto and body parts from hundreds of different manufacturers. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even as much as 100% more for the exact same auto parts at a chain store or at a new car dealership? Chain stores and car dealerships have different price tiers for professional mechanics and do-it-yourselfers, but rockauto.com's prices are the same for everybody, and they're always reliably low. The rockauto.com catalog is also remarkably unique and super easy to navigate. You can quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle, from motor oil to tail lamps and even carpet. And you can also choose the brands, specifications, and the prices that you prefer. Best of all, the prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low and the same for professional mechanics and do-it-yourselfers. So why spend up to twice as much money and time for the same parts when you can go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts that you'll ever need for your car or truck for the best possible prices? Welcome back to the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Getting into segment 3 now today before I wrap things up. I also wanted to get into Blackhawks 2019 second round pick Alex Vlasic, a 6'6" left-handed defenseman, signing his entry-level contract with the team on Tuesday following the conclusion of his junior season with Boston University. Excuse me, folks. But Vlasic is actually someone I've been intrigued by since the Hawks took him 43rd overall back in 2019. He was a guy I was really hoping would still be on the board when the Hawks got on the clock, and then I was super pumped when they wound up taking him as their second pick of the draft. But the reason or reasons I've been so intrigued by Vlasic is, well, of course, the incredible size that he has on the back end, 6'6", and he was 6'6" when he was still just 17 years old. But for being so big, he actually does move pretty well for, having such a long stride and a big body. I wouldn't say that skating is like the strong suit of his game or anything, but he is capable, at least so far in his career, and there's belief he will be able to keep up at the NHL level as well, for being so massive. And also, Mark, Alex is the cousin of longtime San Jose Sharks defenseman Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who was known as one of the best shutdown D-men in the prime of his career. And Alex kind of provides, it kind of brings the same mentality to the table as well. Maybe that shutdown defenseman just runs in the Vlasic blood because Alex is, a hard-nosed defensive defenseman first. He's very responsible in his own zone. Maybe not the most physical for being so large, but hopefully, that's something he kind of grows into more and more as he gets more mature and also kind of adds some weight and muscle going forward now that he's turning pro. Um, so I think he has a frame that the Blackhawks really could use on the back end, especially if he's able to keep up with the NHL pace. He's got a long reach. He knows how to use his size to his advantage. He's just got 3 seasons at BU being one of their minute-eating defensemen, so he's been getting tons of experience in all types of situations. He's got a lot of good assets to his game. The one worry that I've kind of read about from different scouting websites and sources and whatnot is the play with the puck on his stick. It has been a little bit of a concern so far. He's not the greatest outlet passer and sometimes has trouble getting the puck out of his own zone. But hopefully that's an area that he's also going to be able to improve upon with Rockford or Chicago as he starts getting legitimate big time experience. But I'm super excited to see what's going to be coming these next few years for Vlasic, where his game is going to go. I wasn't sure if he was going to leave Boston University after his junior season. I thought maybe he'd stick around and be a 4-year player for BU, but I do believe the decision to make the jump to the professional level is the right call for becoming an NHL player one day, and hopefully sooner rather than later. And Vlasic is actually supposed to arrive in Chicago sometime today and will be joining the team tomorrow morning for practice. And I'm really curious to see, are the Blackhawks going to immediately throw him into NHL action, or are they just going to give him some reps with the big guns, let him kind of see what that level's all about and what it's like to be in the midst of an NHL season, and then go and send him down to Rockford to get some more experience? I feel like the latter is definitely the more likely option. But one thing to consider is, I know this was a completely different regime. Jeremy Colleton was still the coach. Stan Bowman was still in charge. But we did see Mike Hardman last year basically go immediately from college right up to the NHL with the Blackhawks. So we'll see what route the Hawks end up taking for Vlasic. But either way, I'm super excited about this kid stepping onto the scene and officially making the jump to pro hockey following his junior season at BU. All right, I think that is going to wrap up Wednesday, March 16th episode of Locked On Blackhawks. Thank you again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks right now on your favorite podcast app, and go and subscribe on YouTube as well. Turn on those notifications, and you'll be notified when the episode is uploaded each and every day. And after the show, be sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast, as hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone help you become the expert of your fantasy league. It's free and available on all platforms, so be sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey right now, wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, thank you for tuning into today's episode. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And for any questions regarding anything related to the show or to the Blackhawks, feel free to email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. You can also hit me on any one of my Twitter accounts, or you can call 708-653-0572 to leave a voicemail. So until tomorrow's episode, thanks again for listening to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.